Hi, I'm Kevin,
And I'm Larry.
and we are stuffing things.
We are stuffing things. We, we are stuffing things. Yes. Uh, Phil's not with us today. Phil's working. And in the previous two episodes that we filmed, I don't know what order they're going to be aired. We had a moment of silence for him, but he's probably had enough silence. So,
Yeah, he doesn't
Phil,
need
we
any more
miss you, buddy.
silence.
Enjoy your job
Yeah.
and working today. So, I have a question. And I admit that the question comes from my age and my generation a little bit. And I'm usually pretty good about not like generalizing and judging. I choose not to do that. But here's the question, and I'm asking it because I see something different in Kevin. And the question is, what is it that causes 20 somethings today to have such a difficult time making relational commitments? And this is not something that's just today, because I mean, I've seen this with people I worked with and worked for and all sorts of stuff for like 10, 12, 15 years. It just seems like younger people have a hard time. Now, in fairness, let me tell you where I'm coming from. I met my wife and we got married when I was 20 and she was 19, and we've been married for 43 years. So I understand that that's a kind of an unusual circumstance, but it wasn't hard. It wasn't a hard commitment for me to make when I was 20 years old. And I'm just wondering why it seems, or could I be just totally wrong? I mean, maybe there's tons and tons of 20-year-olds out there that are making relational and emotional commitments and keeping them, and they're not paranoid or afraid of it or whatever. But it seems to me that it's a largely missing ingredient in 20-something life, particularly among the males. And I just don't know a lot of 20-something females, so I don't know if that's the case with them too. So I'm going to raise the question, and I'm going to defer to Kevin a lot on the answer.
Okay. So, from my perspective, a lot of it just stems from fear in general, and there are a lot of different categories of that fear. So, there's growing up in a society where everyone tells you that divorce is wrong, but then there's a 50% divorce rate. You're like, well, I don't want to get married then because I don't want to fall into that statistic. So that's the first thing. You start hearing about that when you're 6, 7, 8 years old because your parents or or friends of parents start getting divorced. So that immediately already starts to shut you off at a very adolescent age of I don't want to commit to somebody because it'll just end anyway. And you see a lot of brokenness, and you don't really understand what that brokenness is when you're that young, but it leaves a lasting effect on your life. And then, by the time you get into high school or whatever, um, at that point you're told you have to be successful, you have to have money, you have to have a house, you have to have a car, you have to have the dream job or whatever. And so all of your focus, you could like have a girlfriend or boyfriend in that time period, but your focus is still, I need to be successful, I need to be successful. Um, and we don't really have a mark of what does success actually mean. And so it goes back to our previous conversation about dualism. You have this ideal. I have to make X amount of dollars first. I have to live in this big of a house first. I have to X, Y, or Z, fill in the blank. You have to have all these things figured out first before you can fully commit to somebody. And then before you know it, you're 30 years old and you don't have X, Y, or Z, so you still don't feel like you can commit to this person. Um, and I think that society has shaped us in such a way that we feel like you have to have these things first before you can actually commit to somebody. Before it's like, well, since I'm financially secure now we can get married because I can provide for you, because I've been told my whole life I have to provide for you. And if I don't feel like I can provide for you, why would I commit to you? Because that's not fair to you, type of thing.
Okay.
And I don't know if it was the same in your generation. I know you got married young, for sure. But if that pressure of I have to provide was the same, or if it has shifted in culture. I know that you feel the obligation to provide for Vicky, obviously, but it's a partnership more, I think.
Yeah, let me jump back into that because that's a good thought, and that might lead us into an examination of a shift in thinking in our culture or whatever. I remember very vividly sitting there and thinking, I have to figure life out anyway. It probably will just be easier with somebody that I care for, that cares for me, and that has another set of eyes. I mean, literally, that's what we were talking about. And we realized that getting married that young it was even potentially risky then, because people were saying, I mean, the reality is we met and came back up for honeymoon in 90 days. And the thought was, why not? She's great. I love her. She loves me. Let's give it a whirl. And the intention was to stay married forever. That was our culture, you know. It wasn't a culture that I'd inherited from my parents. My dad was married twice, three times actually, three times. My grandmother was married five times. And so I didn't come out of a culture where that marital fidelity was the norm, and marital endurance was the norm. Vicky's parents were divorced, and she was a middle child of 9, and I was an only child for 8 years and had a half sister. So we were very different in our upbringing. Both were very broken families, very dysfunctional families in a lot of ways. But I do remember that thing saying, you know, I'm dumb. I don't know what life's about. Why not figure it out with somebody that I like and get along with? Just saying it that way sounds kind of irresponsible, or like, oh well. But we also, there were two other thoughts that were part of the longevity of our marriage. One is we didn't like the idea of divorce being an option in any discussion. And the second was the idea of marriage being 50-50. Somehow or another, I got a hold of some teaching and instruction and inspiration that was stupid, that you either give 100% or you don't, and the other person has the option of giving 100% or not. And so, again, the idea of a dualistic balance, I'm going to give half my attention and love to my wife, and I'm going to save the other half to give to other things or people. That's dumb. So I didn't understand dualism back then, but I certainly realized that a dualistic position and ideal wasn't going to work for our marriage. So, but what about that, Kevin? I mean, the authority of a culture speaks to you and says you need to have all these ducks in a row before you make a commitment of that magnitude.
Right.
And the end result of it is that a whole culture doesn't make that commitment.
Right.
So what's up with that, and how do we combat it, or what can we sew in? Or
I think that it stems with parents need to be parents more. I think generally parents put those pressures on their kids as well, that you need to have this stuff figured out before you commit to this. And I think that parents need to not do that and actually build a relationship with their kids. So all these conversations today have been about relationship, but I think that it's key just for life. And so if parents actually started letting their kids know, hey, you know, if you like this person, go ahead and commit to this person and do life with this person, because you two will grow together, and that's what you're designed to do, is to live in a relationship with somebody. I think we would see the commitment go up more. Not that, you know, you haven't got this figured out, you haven't got this figured out. Are you sure this is the right person for you? It goes back to the dualistic thing again.
well, it also goes back to the self-centered, not necessarily selfish. I'm not saying that we can't be selfish, but I don't really put it on your age group of people that everybody's selfish. But I do think there's a tendency to be self-centered. And I think that there was a tendency to be self-centered when I was young too, especially when you're coming into your life and you're figuring out what you're liking and doing and so on and so forth. But you said something interesting just a second ago. You said that it would help if parents said that you're designed to live life with somebody. Is that not a message that is strong in the 20-something culture?
I don't think so. I think that parents don't really talk about that.
What about other authority figures, teachers, stuff like that?
I don't think anyone really talks about how we are designed to live in a relationship. It's always about, what can I do for whatever, to get ahead, to do X, Y, or Z again. So I think that we don't teach relationship well, or show it well, because if you don't have to teach it if you actually just show it well, but I think those discussions should be had. for sure.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier fear. Is there a fear that you're going to lose something if you split yourself, kind of like a zero-sum game?
I think it's more a fear of what if this isn't my actual person? Because that's also a word that's thrown around, my person or my soulmate, whatever that means.
Yeah.
I don't personally believe in that at all. I think it's a bunch of rubbish. I think you can choose to love anyone, and then once you choose to love that person, I think C.S. Lewis talks about it. I'm not sure, but how there's different levels of love, and if you get to that intimate level with that person, like you're gonna continue to love that person throughout whatever happens. I know Dan Muller talks about it a lot. How he loves his wife because he loves his wife, not because she's beautiful or because she does this or that. I think those are key characteristics for finding attraction in someone initially, but once you have that attraction and you actually form a bond and relationship, I don't think those things are as important. But people are just so afraid of, well, if I marry this person, like, what if my soulmate comes along later? I'm gonna miss out on that opportunity. Or if I marry this person, I'm gonna miss out on the opportunity of getting a job somewhere else. Or I think that's more the fear is missing opportunity rather than
Than recognizing an opportunity that's kind of in front of you. I do understand a little bit how you think, because another thing I remember vividly thinking is believing that if you took pretty much any man or woman that was even remotely the same in age, and you stuck them on they were stranded on a desert island because their cruise ship went down. They were the two that survived. That they would end up finding attraction in one another and falling in love. And so I do agree that, all right, so that brings up the point then. It goes back a little bit to the ideal, to that focus drive thing we talked about a couple episodes ago, or when we were filming a couple episodes ago. And it talks about self-centeredness as an examination of perspective, not as a criticism of personality. Okay, so if we are evaluating everything off how it impacts us, then we also have to have a criteria of what's desirable. In other words, what kind of impact do we want to have that's desirable, and what do we consider negative? So how does commitment, you said it's about fear, how does making a commitment to another person, and I'm not suggesting, please believe me, I pastor and counsel people in marriage and do marriages and stuff. I've never counseled anybody to get married 90 days. I consider it a great grace for Vicki and I to have had a long and happy marriage. But how does the idea of a commitment translate? And you mentioned that I'm going to miss an opportunity. I'm going to miss an opportunity. How is it that the opportunities that are presented with another person are so opaque? No one thinks to see them. I'm thinking about a passage, I think it's in the book of Amos, that says, one can put to flight 1,000, 2, 10,000. So the lie that I am going to have more for myself by myself it speaks against that adage, against that wisdom.
right.
It's almost like the feeling is around the equation that 1 plus 1 equals 1/2, instead of 1 plus 1 equaling a factor, an exponential factor of possibilities.
Right. I'll use my experience. Throws around the idea of like moving. Right now, I'm at a point where I'm like, I don't want to move necessarily because I have a great job. And so I'm like, if I lose this job, will I be able to get something that's the same or better? And so I think that I lose, I become very self centered in that regard because I already have something that's comfortable, right? Um, and so I think that would be like the missed opportunity. So even if we like came together, like we'd have this ability to do more, but maybe our tracks don't align necessarily. Of well, this person wants to go do this, but it would hinder the other person from what they're already doing.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, let me ask explore this. This is helpful to me. It's helped me understand. What role does agreement or the fear that you can't have it? In other words, do you have to have perfect agreement before you can feel like you're in an advantageous position to take advantage of that exponential increase that relationship brings.
For me personally, I don't think so. For people in my generation, yes, I think that that statement rings true. Um, and I don't know how to assure someone else that you do have that intention of, I don't need to have everything figured out. Let's go ahead and explore this together type of thing. So I'm befuddled as much as you are in that sense. But I don't know how to get other people or I don't know why. I don't know where the gap is between my thinking and someone else's thinking.
Right. And I want to be honest too. I'm sure it's not just isolated to a generation. Fear's a universal enemy. Gosh, this is really, it's just like gotten deeper than just a conversation. Okay, so I don't, in my observations, let me put it that way. In my observations, I don't think that younger people in your generation or older people in mine, I don't think they have abandoned the actual response to the need to be with other people. I just think that they have been unplugged from the concept of commitment, because I still see people being with other people or trying to be with other people in other forms that mitigate against having to make a commitment, or relationships with a lower commitment level. And what if it's just the opposite of the way it feels? What if the very act of making the commitment, and again, I don't think it shouldn't have criteria and there shouldn't be testing time and all that kind of stuff, but when you get to the point where there's an opportunity to make a commitment, what if the making of the commitment actually provides something to the stability and agreement and longevity of the relationship that we're being talked out of through the fear of the commitment and the loss of individuality or whatever?
Yeah, I think that speaks true. That if people just actually committed and held firm to their beliefs, that we'd live in a more maybe loving society. People would be able to love better if they learn to commit.
Yeah.
Um,
How would you define commitment? The word risk comes to mind. So how would you define commitment?
Commitment to me would be staying true to what you have chosen.
So because we know Google has the answer to everything, here's the definition if you just type in define commitment. The state or quality of being dedicated to a cause, activity, etc. The second definition is an engagement or obligation that restricts freedom of action. What an interesting, what an interesting juxtaposition of a positive and a negative. The state or quality of being dedicated to a cause, activity, etc. And I think in our definition we could say person.
Right.
And the second definition is an engagement or obligation that restricts freedom of action. Now, I think that sucks as a definition of commission, but I can understand the truth of it, especially in relationship to people. Because the truth of the matter is we do restrict our actions. But the capacity, so let's just talk about one example of this. When I married Vicky, it did in some ways restrict what I could do by myself. I had to take her into account when I chose recreation, when I chose to spend money or whatever the case is. And so there's no question that there's a restriction. On the other hand, we went to Bible college together. We moved and saw different parts of the country. In the course of that situation, we had a baby. We had Laurel. And she was a whole new life. And then Vicky got involved in things that I would never have gotten involved in, and I was exposed to those things and became a part of them as a result of that. I got involved in things that on her own she would never have gotten involved in, more likely than not. And so that's what I mean by needing to examine real life and that exponential increase of possibility. And I mean, how do you weigh, wow, I can't buy another motorcycle right now, to having a daughter? You know, I mean, they don't compare, but I guess they do compare in some ways. Somehow or another, we've lost touch with the hope that there is and what could be. And we see the definition being an engagement or obligation that restricts freedom of action.
Yeah, that's a terrible definition.
I think it's a true one, though. I think that's what people, that's the definition that people are, in one form or another, are letting run around their head.
Definitely. Which is too bad. That was not my definition.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. How do we change that? How do we introduce people to the other side of commitment?
I think people have to be okay with letting go of freedom, because that most of that freedom isn't life-giving. So what you're really doing is letting go of things that aren't bringing you life for something that can bring you life.
That's a good point. Well, I vote that we come up with a different definition than Google's.
Commitment is ...
All right. Commitment is adding fidelity of action to the purposes that you think are important. Commitment is walking out the steps that are naturally called for when you say you believe something.
I'm on board with that definition.
That's not bad. I could probably use a little bit of wordsmithing. But
Yeah. We could ask the audience, what is your definition of commitment?
yeah.
Because we want questions and answers. We want everything.
Yeah.
We want people to subscribe and like our videos.
All right. Well, my brain hurts right now.
That was good. So, we're stuffing things.
And that's
This
it
is
for
the only video we've signed off on, so
Yeah.
you're welcome.
Yeah. We do want your comments, though, especially on that question. How would you define commitment? And please just don't put Google's in there. We already know that one. Let's
Yeah.
be a little more creative than that.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.